In our second depreciation function, we're going to look at a slightly different logical way to do that same analysis we just did. So let's jump back into VBA. We're going to copy our function. And we're going to start version 2 of depreciation amount. So let's do V2. Make sure we change our answer at the end to V2. Now let's go in here and make some adjustments. And what we're going to adjust is how we've structured our if statements here. Initially, we just used this and statement to basically test multiple criteria at once. But we were always testing the same thing, that section 179 equals no, and section 179 equals no, and section 179 equals no. When that's the case, that we're kind of testing the same thing over and over again, we can probably find a better way to do it. And that better way to do it is we're going to use what's called nested if statements. So we're going to start with our first if statement is just going to be if section 179 equals no. All right. If that's true, then we're going to go into our different method questions of saying is method equal to S, D, or M. And so this is where we're going to have a series of if statements or nested if statements. So now I'm going to say if method equals, in this case was D, then. Now, here we have to be really careful with our code, right? Because I just created a new if statement. It doesn't yet have the end if. And if I try to run this right now, we're probably going to get something that doesn't quite work. Let's go check. So let's take our depreciation function here. Let's actually lock our cells so everything copies over nicely. And let's change this to V2 and see what happens. All right, we got a compile error. Block if without end if. That's telling us we didn't close all of our if statements. So we need that end if in there. It's going to put us in debug mode, right? Yellow highlighted line. As a result, we can't go back and do anything in our Excel spreadsheet until we fix it. So let's come over here. We're going to look for where we started the problem. So there's the next if statement I created. And now what I want to do is set up another end if. All right, you might notice that things just look a mess now, right? I have an if statement here. It does actually end down here, but it's hard to tell that right now. And the reason is because of how the code is organized and indented. All right, this is where indenting becomes very important. If I indent this here, so now these two else ifs are on the same line as this initial if, it makes it clear that all these statements kind of go together in a block. I can make it even cleaner still if I tab in each of these other lines. So now I can see, okay, here's one if statement and the code that follows it. Here's another else if with the code that follows if it is true. And then the last else if that works if that piece is true. So now we have it broken out and we can see this whole if block is one big if statement. We can then also track that this if goes down to this final end if that's lined up with it. On this left-hand side, they're all indented the same way. So the indenting allows us to keep track of our code and keep it straight. So let's go ahead and stop this to reset it. And now let's see if this is working. We come back in, and it gives us the right answer. However, we haven't exactly changed everything to how we wanted it. Since we already tested for section 179 equals to no at the beginning of this if statement, we can delete that here. So let's delete this, and now our code has basically removed all the section 179 no references and moved them up to the beginning. So let's talk through logically what's happening here. If section 179 is equal to no, assume that it's no, so let's come over here. It is no. Then we go into this block of code. Right, so everything inside between this if-then statement and the next else if is going to execute. But the first thing we see is another if statement. So if the method is equal to D, we do this first piece. Else, if it's equal to S, we do the second piece. Else, if it's equal to M, we do the third piece. So it iterates through and it figures out which of those statements are true. So it's the same as doing the AND condition we had earlier. We're just separating it out into essentially a nested if statement, much like we've used nested if statements within an Excel spreadsheet as well. All right, so we've made all the adjustments here. We now have a little bit nicer function. We have the else if statement, and we're still getting the same answer out that we got as before.